Welcome, viewers and listeners, to episode 7 of season 5 of Dudes of the Dead podcast. Today, we're going to review a film called Misery from 1990. I want to give a shout out to my sister, Laura Vincent, and Matt Gillingham, two people who both came to me and said, you guys should do Misery for your podcast. So I like Misery. It's a great film, but I think you two were part of the reason for me choosing Misery today. But before we review Misery, we're going to do our quick cut segment.
Indeed.
Do you want to kick us off with something you've watched recently that you thought was notable?
Yes. And I would like to. Okay. So what my quick cut is Manhunter from 1986, Michael Mann. It is the first Hannibal Lecter film based on the Thomas Harris novels. Now, if you're not familiar with the name Michael Mann or the year 1986, this is the Miami Vice of serial killer films. There's lots of pastel colors, and there's the same Miami Vice kind of vibe, which used to bother me about this film. But I've gone back and watched it, and I think it's good. So Jack Crawford, Will Graham, Hannibal Lecter, all characters that you know. Brian Cox plays Hannibal Lecter.
Oh, yeah, he's good.
And William, I didn't write down his name. He was in the original CSI Vegas. William Peterson, Bill to his friends. He's in this. He plays Will Graham. And there's a very famous, he was famous in the 80s because he was actually a Chicago police officer who ended up in film and did a bunch of films playing a cop. So anyway, that's my quick pick. I think it's worth going back to watch this for how they portray Hannibal Lecter. If you like those films, I think William Peterson's great. I think he's a good actor. And I just think what they did with the film was really interesting. And I can't remember the actor's name that plays the murderer in this film, but it's really, this film reminds me more of the television series Hannibal than of the films like Silence of the Lambs. That they took that to a whole other level, but this is more like TV,
right?
I think.
So I've gone back and forth a little bit about this debate on whether Silence of the Lambs is a horror film.
Yeah.
And I've heard when you juxtapose it to Manhunter, it seems more like a horror film.
Yes, I would agree.
So given that you went back and watched Manhunter, does that make you see Silence of the Lambs more as a horror film? And this is more of the procedural?
Yeah, good question. Because I definitely don't think I'm consistent in my views on this one, which Mike never points out.
Never.
Yeah,
no, but it's interesting, right? Like,
I agree with you, and I think
because things are relative sometimes that way, right? So if we compare Silence of the Lambs to Seven, maybe it seems like less of a horror film. But if we compare it to Manhunter, maybe it seems like more of a horror film.
Yeah, I would have to concede that point that when you compare these two films, this is more of a procedural,
right?
It's more about Will Graham's pursuit of the killer, and this is called the Tooth Fairy. So it's more of his pursuit as opposed to, we do see certain things, but they're more implied than actual. So I think, yes, I think
So Mike was right. Silence of the Lambs is a horror film. Is that what you're saying?
No, okay. I'm saying compared to this one, it's more of a horror film. Okay. It's all relative.
It doesn't cross the finish line.
No,
okay.
You're not right about anything.
All right, fair enough.
Okay, what's your quick pick?
All right, well, my quick cut is actually an entire franchise review of the Halloween series, but I won't.
So just sorry to interrupt. Are you trying every time to cheat this whole thing and either
I don't think I've done one legit.
A game, a series, or whatever? Like, oh, this is a TV show, but I'll put it in my quick cut.
Actually, that was you, I think, that picked the TV series, wasn't it?
What did I do?
The fourth season of the HBO one.
Oh, yeah. That's true. True Detective.
True Detective.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Anyways, so I alluded in a previous quick cut, I did say Halloween 2. And since then, I've watched Halloween 3, 4, 5, and Resurrection. So I'm not going to go through each one, but...
H2O is after Resurrection then, I think?
That's right. I'd seen H2O before, so I didn't go back and rewatch that one. But I've now seen every Halloween film. So those are the ones I was missing.
Okay.
Season of the Witch... It's so odd to have Michael Myers and then all of a sudden...
Yeah.
And apparently the original concept was for the Halloween franchise for each Halloween entry to be a different horror story.
Yeah.
But they wanted to they felt good about Michael Myers after the first one, so they made number 2, and then they tried to go back to making it different. But at that point, it's too late.
It's not a bad film on its own.
No, it's not.
But as part of the franchise, you're scratching your head going, how does this fit in with at least that was my take.
No, I agree. And for me, the source of the horror in Season of the Witch didn't do much for me.
Yeah.
I didn't love it. 4 and 5 are bad.
Which one of those has Paul Rudd?
5.
I think it's 5.
If I recall. Yeah, I watched them all in one afternoon. So 4 and 5. 4 was okay. 5 was not good.
Oh, 5's terrible.
Resurrection is terrible. That's got to be one of the worst.
Remind me what Resurrection is, because I've seen them all, but I can't remember if the storyline of Resurrection.
Maybe that's the Paul Rudd one. I don't know. It's fairly nonsensical. There's just all these people.
That's not the one with Busta Rhymes and all those weird.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay,
yes.
That's what I thought it was. Okay, that's.
Yeah. So that one was.
Oh, that's horrible.
It was just bad. It was actually borderline painful to watch. So, yeah, Resurrection not good. And so I think H2O I kind of liked.
I liked it.
Yeah, I liked H2O.
Yeah, I liked it.
So after watching all of these, what it made me do in the end is appreciate Rob Zombie's Halloween that much more. Mm-hmm. So I get that if you compare Rob Zombie's Halloween to the original John Carpenter Halloween, that you could make a strong argument the original Halloween's better. But then if you want to compare Rob Zombie's Halloween to Halloween Resurrection or Halloween 5 or Halloween 4, I feel like it's way better.
Yeah, I have to give you that one. I can't argue. Despite my misgivings about the Rob Zombie ones, they're much closer to the original intent.
And there's good filmmaking there happening.
Fair.
But fair. 4, 5, and Resurrection, not a whole lot of good filmmaking happening. And then if we want to go to Halloween Ends, that's a gong show.
Yeah.
So I think overall, Halloween 1 and 2 are worth watching. I think Rob Zombie's first Halloween is worth watching. And I think the first David Gordon Green one is worth watching, and H2O. So 5 notable Halloween films, and the rest are pretty bad.
There you go.
All right. That's my quick cut franchise review of that.
Way to take one for the team. I haven't seen them all consecutively recently.
Yeah.
I've never seen them consecutively, but I have gone back and watched. I hadn't thought that I'd seen the whole franchise, but I have. But it wasn't like with Saw where I watched them all in a month. Yeah. And I've seen 1 and 2 quite a few times. 3, I don't remember if I've seen it since I saw it in theaters when it came out.
So would that have been jarring at the time to be like, oh, what? Michael Myers is in this? What's going on?
Well, it was...
or I guess it was marketed that it wasn't.
It was questionable. I wasn't jarring, I don't think. And I don't think I was enough of a film critic necessarily, but it was how is that a Halloween film? Other than the fact that it takes place at Halloween.
Yeah. It might have worked if they went 1 and then 2 was a different story.
Totally.
And they continued from there. But once you do 1 and 2 with Michael Myers, then 3 is something different.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's jump into
Misery. Yes.
You almost died. You have a compound fracture of the tibia in both legs, and the fibula in the right leg is fractured too. And as soon as the road's open, I'll take you to a hospital. In the meantime, you've got a lot of recovering to do.
There is nothing to worry about. You're gonna be just fine. I'm your #1 fan.
Yes. So based on the novel by Stephen King, directed by Rob Reiner, and starring Richard Farnsworth as Buster, James Caan as Paul Sheldon, and the amazing Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes. And while we're talking about casting, this blew my mind. So these were the actors who were offered the part of Paul Sheldon: Michael Douglas, Harrison Ford, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, Richard Dreyfuss, Gene Hackman, and Robert Redford were all offered that's just the most A-list.
Holy cow.
That's insane. So they were all offered this part of Paul Sheldon. They all turned it down. And James Caan finally said, I'll do it.
Wow. He's so good.
He is good. But I'm trying to picture like, oh, what would this movie be like with like Al Pacino or?
You're out of order.
I think Robert De Niro actually would probably do. I actually think a lot of these guys would do a good job. And I guess the idea is that he had to lie in bed for just weeks on end.
Yeah,
and he's kind of like a demasculated character just because of the situation he's in, and all these other guys turned it down. But that's like the who's who for that time period. Like that's every A-list.
This is 1990, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Whereas Bette Midler was the only other one I think who was considered for Kathy Bates.
I can't see Bette Midler doing this.
No.
She's not, what's the word? She's not insidious enough. Like, and I'm not suggesting Kathy Bates is insidious in real life. It's just her acting, Bette Midler's played comedic roles and dramatic roles, and this is a dramatic role, but there's something bipolar about how Kathy Bates plays this character that's just like so believable and so terrifying.
Yes.
Kind of like we've talked about with Mia Goth.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
It reminds me of that because she can turn on a dime and you're like, holy cow, where did that come from? And same with Kathy Bates.
100%. And to your point, Kathy Bates won an Oscar for this. Yeah. One of the few horror movies to ever win an Oscar and the only Stephen King adaptation apparently to win an Oscar.
And let's also point out the fact that Rob Reiner, this is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. For a guy that started on a TV sitcom, he's an outstanding director. Yeah. And he's made, I think, the two best adaptations, Stand By Me and Misery.
Did you come across, I know she won the Oscar. Was he nominated for Best Director for Misery? Do you know?
I don't know.
That'd be interesting. I can try and look that up afterwards. Anyways, the premise for this film, after a famous author is rescued from a car crash by a fan of his novels, he comes to realize that the care he's receiving is only the beginning of a nightmare of captivity and abuse. So I'm curious to ask you, I know you are a big Stephen King fan. So under what context did you see this film? Had you read the novel first? And so what was your experience watching this for the first time, if you remember?
Okay, so during the 80s would have been my sort of peak consumption period of Stephen King novels. I mean, I typically will read the new ones when they come out, or I'll listen to the audiobook. I quite like his Bill Hodges trilogy, the ones he's done in the last few years with the Mercedes Killer. And it was made into a TV series, actually, with Gleason. What's the actor's name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So back to your question. Yes, I had read the novel first, and I was hesitant to see the film because there were so many poor adaptations of Stephen King.
Yeah, and apparently he's not thrilled with a lot of the ways his work has been. Yeah. He said this was actually one of his favorite adaptations.
Yeah. And I would think, does Stand By Me come before or after? I have a feeling it comes after, but
I thought before, but I'm not. You're more the Stephen King scholar than I am.
Yeah, I don't remember the release date for that. But
did Misery stand out amongst his work at the time when you read it?
Well, the short answer is no.
Right.
But reevaluation in hindsight, I think what keeps me coming back to Stephen King, because I think I've said this before, he gets a bad rap as just, kind of like a pulp fiction B grade, horror writer. But he's done many novels because, he's written 50 plus. He must be close to 60 now novels. Not all of them are Carrie or Salem's Lot. Quite a few of them, like Misery, have to do with human behavior, fear, but fear not in the way of a monster or the thing in the closet or whatever, but psychological fear and I had in my notes, a question for you would be, is this a horror film? I consider this to be a psychological horror film because you're always on edge. What is Annie going to do? I don't know if I anticipated how good this would be, but it's just so well done. And very little of the film happens outside of that bedroom.
Yeah.
And for a director and for a performer to be able to maintain your interest and tension in a bedroom is more like a really good play.
And there is a stage play version, hey?
Oh, is there? I didn't know that.
Do you want to guess who plays Paul Sheldon in the stage play version?
I don't even think I have a clue.
Bruce Willis.
Really?
I know. It was really interesting preparing for this episode because I just learned all these things about this film.
They remind me, I mean, physically, they're similar.
I can see it, actually.
Yeah.
I think Bruce Willis might do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah.
But it is like a stage play because, as you say, other than the sheriff and the deputy scenes, almost everything. And I guess there's a few scenes with his editor, publisher.
Yeah, very, very minimal though, right?
But overall, it definitely takes place in that bedroom.
Yeah.
Which I like those types of films, those claustrophobic
absolutely
character, like really just
it's just two characters really, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't mention it's 7.8 on IMDb.
Yes, you're right. Sorry.
And 91% critics and 90% audience. This is much more accessible for an audience.
100%.
Right?
Maybe one of his more accessible ones.
Reiner or Stephen King?
Stephen King.
Certainly of his, this is sort of mid works. It's not early. I don't remember the publication date for Misery, but it would be mid 80s, I think.
Because I feel like there's a couple of films that even for non-horror fans that they've seen and they appreciate. Yeah. And I find Misery is one that time and time again, most people have seen and most people like, even if they don't consider themselves to be horror fans.
Yeah, I would agree. I think because, number one, I think it's accessible because of the performances and because of, I think the terrifying thing for me, and I don't think this scared me when I was younger, I really felt like I understood an artist's dilemma. Like when you're famous, when people and for sure this is part, and I don't mean that it's a trilogy, but there were several novels that Stephen King wrote about writers.
Yes.
Because he was going through, particularly in the 80s, he was a coke addict. And when he got off coke, I read somewhere he was going through one or more bottles of aspirin a day.
Wow.
He was just popping them like Pez. And because he was getting these wicked headaches.
Like withdrawal headaches?
I don't remember them attributing whether he had something wrong with him or whatever, but I'm guessing it could have been.
What's the one about the writer who goes out to the cabin? There's the mirror.
That's
a dark.
No, it's
something side.
It's not Rear Window, but it's a Secret Window, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
With Johnny Depp, that's the one you're thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's another one with Pierce Brosnan where he's playing a writer, and that's the one, and I can't remember what that one's called, where he gets all these headaches.
Right.
And so
I think you get some insights into Stephen King's struggles because he's sort of portraying himself a little bit in these ones.
Yeah. And I think, it's semi-autobiographical in the sense of, every novel that came out of his in the 80s was like Doubleday, Book of the Month. Like I think he was huge. And I think that was, his prime time of his novels. And it must have been, and maybe to some extent still is, scary when you hear like, I'm your number one fan.
Yes, for sure.
And
I think because I think the opening shot almost is the champagne glass, the cigarette, and the lighter.
Yeah. Do
you think that's his ritual for Steve? Do you think Stephen King does that?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think he smokes anymore.
Okay.
But beer and cigarettes came in a lot of his stories.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because, and I'm not saying this to be critical. He talks about he's a small town, like white trash. That's how he grew up in rural Maine. Right. And, he definitely, I mean, he was a school teacher for a very brief time, before Carrie took off, but he definitely, smoked a lot and drank a lot and then got into coke when he had money. And that was the thing in the 80s, right? Was cocaine. But yeah, I just think it's so accessible. Like it's not hard to imagine how scary it would be to be famous for something, whether it's writing or music or an athlete or whatever, and have people attach themselves to you.
Oh, yeah.
But, there's many actors, and
you can see why they live in these gated communities behind these
absolutely
walls of security. Because, yeah, I mean, there's unfortunately some percentage of your audience is probably going to be crazy and obsessed with you. So you got to watch out for those
And I mean,
people.
Stephen King has also had the dubious distinction of someone claiming to have read his work before committing a murder. And that's come up with the same as like Marilyn Manson or heavy metal or that somehow this turns people or, it's like
video games, Grand Theft Auto.
100%. Right. And like, I don't buy that at all. Whatever the genre is, if you are unstable in some way, shape or form, you're more easily influenced by the things that you're consuming, whether that's reading or music or videos or whatever. If you can maintain the difference between reality and fantasy, it's not going to influence you to go do something horrible, right?
Did you see this in theaters then?
I was trying to remember when I watched this. So 1990, I would have been midway through my music degree. So I don't think I would have seen it in theaters,
right.
Although I was in Victoria. So I may have seen this in theaters, but it doesn't ring a bell for theaters for me.
Do you think the basic premise of this is a spoiler?
So what you mean the summary that you read or what?
Well, yeah, like the source of the horror here. I'm thinking if someone just saw Misery and went and watched it and had no idea what they're in for. Do we need to just quickly go into spoilers, or do you think?
Well, did you read your summary already?
I did. I guess it kind of gives it away. And if you watch the trailer, you'd probably have a pretty good sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point, viewers and listeners, because we often struggle with how much to give away. And sometimes you can just say, like our last episode when we talked about Mandy, I caught myself, although if you're listening carefully, you'll realize that I gave away the death of a character before we were in the spoiler section. But it's tricky sometimes because it's sometimes hard depending on how the film is made. But I agree with you in the sense that, I do think the whole premise of this is a spoiler.
Especially these days, I find I talk to so many people who are frustrated by trailers because they give away so much. They try to just go in blind. And because I think in some cases we have a younger audience who doesn't know this film or maybe doesn't know what it's about. So if you just heard, oh yeah, I'm going to go watch Misery.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, and I've said this a few times before too, though, like if this was a 2022 film, I'd be more concerned about that. This is 34 years old, this film.
True, but I think a younger audience who was born in 2005 or whatever.
Fair.
Right?
I mean, you would have been 7 when this came out.
Yeah. So
you've seen it in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess to play devil's advocate, which I never do, like, should you not remake The Crow then because it's been a movie and people know what it's about?
No,
I mean,
no, I'm okay with remakes.
Right, but I mean, it's the same thing. You know what the film's about. So why would you, like, it's a spoiler to remake it because you know what the film's going to do.
I feel like that's different a little bit.
Yeah, it is different. Yeah. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but you know what the film's about.
Sure. I guess if you want to know nothing about what happens in Misery, I guess you should have already watched it because
turn it off
last episode
5 minutes ago.
Yeah. So I guess minor spoilers for the plot, but we're going to go into it.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So if you want to know nothing, go watch Misery, then come back and watch. But there will be some spoilers here. So he's an author who gets into a snowstorm after finishing his novel, and he gets rescued by Annie Wilkes, who takes him back to her place and starts nursing him back to health. And he quickly realizes that she's actually completely psychotic, is totally obsessed with him, and despite her issue with swear words, she's okay with taking hostages and psychologically and physically torturing them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of scenes we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah. So his rescuer is actually the source of the horror in this case. And I like those films where your caretaker ends up being the one you have to be afraid of. There was one a few years ago with the wheelchair.
Yeah, Run.
Yeah, Run. Yeah. Like I loved Run. I love the concept of that. And so this is very similar So he's bedridden. The practical effects on his legs when they show the damage from the car crash.
Oh, the car crash. Yeah.
Yeah, like he looks they did a good job of that. That looks really bad.
It did.
Pretty believable.
I mean, I was just interesting because I was looking at my notes, and I think maybe it's not my only, but my niggle with this film, having grown up and although there's not a lot of snow where we live now, but I grew up in Ontario, so there's lots of snow. And I kind of learned to drive in the snow. He's driving way too fast in a car with regular tires, no snow tires, on a mountain road. And when it starts to snow, he doesn't slow down. And I'm like,
to be fair, that he's not a resident of that area, right?
No, he's not. But he comes there every year.
Yeah,
I mean, and I'm sorry, if you're an adult, you know that snow is hard to drive in, particularly on a classic car with.
Tell that to people who drive around in IMO. But.
Fair enough. I take that back. There's plenty of adults who have no idea how to drive in the snow.
In my experience, it's actually most people have no idea.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
You're from Ontario. I mean, so am I from Ontario, but.
The other, just to come back to this idea of your number one fan, I think another interesting thing for me that's not really a horror element, but I really like it, is there's one of my takeaways, and maybe I'm misreading this, but it seems like the Paul Sheldon character questions how accountable am I to my fans?
Right.
Like, and this happens in music all the time. Like, your fans make you. And then there are artists who don't want to sing their hits because they've got a new album or whatever it is. And there's two sides to that coin, right? There's like, look, give me an opportunity to be an artist and to move forward and not just rehash all my hits. And some performers, if you do a stint in Vegas, you can pretty much be assured you're going to just sing all your hits. That's what people come for. That's what you're getting the big bucks for. Now, as an artist, that must be super painful. It's like, I've done this for 30 years. There are some artists who go, yeah, but that's what my fans want. And I'm accountable to them. They put me here. They pay the bills. I'm going to do it. And there's others who think, no, if you want to hear me, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I feel like there's a little bit of that going on here.
Yep, for sure.
Right? Like,
and I think I fall more on the side, like, he's the artist and it's his story.
Yeah.
And you can tell it however you want. And if you want to kill off characters, you're welcome to do that. If the fans like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't.
I agree.
So I think that's where I fall on that one, but maybe I could be persuaded.
I mean, I don't know. I certainly lean that way too. It's like, as an artist.
So you think Stephen King weaves that in because he struggles with that? Or is there times where Stephen King did something that was controversial to his fans? Do you know?
I don't know if there's, because he's not done, he's done a few longer series, like the Gunslinger series, The Dark Tower. And he's done some, trilogies, like the Bill Hodges trilogy.
He deviates from horror sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
And for sure stories he did, like Shawshank Redemption. And so does he get flack, do you think, when he deviates from horror? Like, I wonder for him if maybe like his fans like him because he's a horror author. So when he goes and writes something that's not horror, I wonder if they're like, oh, come on. Like, I
think that happens. I think that does happen because I know, like, a novel that rarely gets talked about is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Yeah.
Not a horror by any stretch, except the fear element is a young girl who gets lost in the forest. And if I remember correctly, Tom Gordon is a baseball player and she loves him. And that's what gets her through her ordeal.
Yeah.
And this is why this might appear to be gushing or whatever, but there's a few things that have happened over the 40 years that I've been reading Stephen King. Because I was in grade 7 when I got my first Stephen King book. I was 12 and I'm 57, so 45 years. I think his best work is not horror.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It has horror elements and it has fear and it has human behavior, but it's about human beings.
He's very good at that. Even in his horror, I feel like that's
Absolutely.
why I like Stephen King is for the characters.
Look at Stand By Me. That is not a horror film. That's a coming of age story. It's about brotherhood. It's about masculinity. It's about all of these things that are not horror at all. Shawshank Redemption, not a horror story. Yeah. But what interests me though, is many of those stories, like Misery's a novel. A lot of the good adaptations, Shawshank, Stand By Me, those were short stories.
Yes, that's interesting.
Right? They weren't novel length.
Yeah. But I love, like, growing up, and I didn't read much Stephen King. I tend to watch the movie or TV adaptations or whatever. But me and my sisters loved, like, The Langoliers, and we loved The Stand.
Yeah.
But they had horrible endings with terrible CGI, and they were just, but the characters were so good throughout the movie that I didn't care about the ending. I just loved, like the mystery and the sense of like what's going to happen next and the interaction of the different characters, and that's what I think Stephen King does really well.
I mean, Pennywise, exactly the same.
Yeah,
you've got this cast of adult characters, and then you've got the kids who are, in my opinion, arguably more compelling than the adults, and yes, you have this, cosmic clown or whatever that you don't really know what it is until the very end. And it's a horrible ending.
Yeah.
It's like, who thought this would be scary?
Yeah. It's fine. Now I'm going back to your original premise and contradicting myself, because I'm like, if Mike Flanagan or Ari Aster or Jordan Peele, like, I'm going to make like a comedy this year, or like, I was annoyed because I loved Hereditary and I loved Midsommar. And then Beau is Afraid was like different, or if he's like, I'm not going to make horror anymore. It's like, but that's why you're so great. That's why. So I can see from the fans' perspective too, that like,
and this
you come to expect like, I want something else from this person, and then you don't get it.
I know this has been a big deal for, well, I shouldn't say I know. I've read Bono's memoir this year, and I've been guilty of this myself. I mean, I was a sideline fan of U2 in high school. And then I got more into them after I left high school. And then, like many people, like when Rattle and Hum came out, it was like, I was blown away.
Yeah.
And then I didn't like Zooropa, and I didn't like, and part of the reason I didn't was because it wasn't Rattle and Hum.
For sure. Like Mumford & Sons for us were like, they totally changed direction. Like, what is this?
Yeah. And I've had that, Mumford & Sons, another one, I had that reaction. And it's like, I mean, now I think I'm more of the attitude of, but they were growing as artists. They wanted to try something different. They wanted to push the boundary. And when you read his memoir, that's exactly the rationale. It's like, we don't want to get stuck in this groove of always, they started off as a post-punk, rock and roll band. And in the early stuff, there is that angst and anger and all the rest of it. But you grow up, and you're 30. You don't need to be a punk anymore. You can do something different. And I don't know. So long-winded answer to, I don't remember a controversy about necessarily any one thing, but I do recall there's definitely pushback with Stephen King around, but that's not a horror. That's not especially the novel length stuff.
Yeah, I wonder if he feels pressure to like make horror stories, but
I mean, in my notes, that's one of my notes is this seems to be Stephen King leaking through the story, because I think as a very popular author who's had many adaptations of his work into film, I do think he must feel some sort of obligation to his fans. Now, I'm not suggesting that he writes for his fans, because I do believe this strongly, that if you write music or write a novel or whatever it is, make a film, and you're trying to capitalize on a trend, you're going to miss the trend. People are going to see through exactly what you're doing, and it's going to have the opposite effect, where you look like you're an opportunistic dick for trying to jump on a bandwagon.
Yep.
If you write what you feel is important for you to get across, whatever the message is, if it's genuine, if it's authentic, if it's sincere, you will have fans and you will alienate other fans.
Yeah.
There's no question in my mind.
Yep. No, I agree with that. So to bring this back to Misery.
Yeah, sorry.
I think, so that's what we're experiencing. So she does not like the direction that he has taken the story. And she basically, I don't know if this is spoilers, but yeah, he is under her care and she has a lot of power over him.
Yes.
And actually, one thing I really like about this film is the duality of she has a physical advantage over him.
Yeah.
She has physical power over him, but he has psychological power over her. So he has the power to write the story that she is attached to, that she is emotionally invested in, and he can manipulate her based on that. But then she has the physical control of him because she's a nurse and he's at her mercy. So that play between the psychological edge versus the physical edge, I think, is what makes this movie really cool. And that's
absolutely.
what I like about it.
And it's certainly what creates a lot of the tension.
Yes.
Because you're seeing time pass through the window of his bedroom, and you're thinking, okay, well, I don't have a real sense of how long he's there, but you see seasons go. And she, like, just from one moment to the next, she's caring, but there's an edge. There's a knife edge to that caring.
Totally.
And sometimes that she cuts him with that. And I don't mean that, physically, but sometimes she's just so harsh.
Do we need to just jump into spoilers, do you think?
I think we do.
I think we do. Okay. So do you recommend Misery?
Yeah, 110%.
Yeah, 100% as well. I think it's super accessible. I think even if you're not a horror fan, people will enjoy this movie.
I agree.
The performance is so good.
Yeah.
And the characters are so good. But yeah, so this is 100% recommend. I think Misery is one of the all-time best horror films. It's in that league, I think, with like The Shining and The Exorcist. And I think it's one of the better.
Yes.
In terms of quality?
In terms of quality, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
So we both 2 thumbs up for this.
Yeah.
And we're going to spoilers.
Spoilers.
Okay, so spoilers.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
I don't know why I'm jumping into this. I couldn't tell if the version that I saw was different. I had this recollection. Do you remember the very end of the film?
Yep.
Where he goes into the restaurant with his agent.
Yeah.
And there's a waitress that says, I'm your number one fan. And I love the end credits, which is I'll be seeing you.
It shows as Kathy Bates for a minute, right?
Yes.
And then it flips back. Yeah, okay.
So, the whole point of that was to just orient us to where we are.
Sorry.
I seem to remember that before he's on the sidewalk, there's a scene in his apartment building where he's coming out of his apartment and something happens, but that wasn't there. And I'm like, I can't remember. Am I misremembering? Am I conflating this with another film? Do you remember any scene like that?
I don't.
Okay.
There could be a director's cut or something maybe out there.
I wonder.
Or multiple versions. I think the version I saw is as you described. I don't recall that other scene, but.
Yeah, because I and again, like my memory's not infallible, but I remember a scene that I thought I remembered a scene where before he hits the sidewalk, he's in his apartment building and then I'm like, really? Is he on the sidewalk already? I thought there was a scene where my recollection is, and it's a really good recollection if it doesn't exist, is that he's coming out of his apartment and she's in the hallway. You think it's her.
Oh, interesting.
He's having like an episode and thinks he sees her and she's going to attack him.
Oh, that's Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, I think.
Oh, maybe. Okay, I'm conflating it. The quality level is so similar that I think it's the same film.
I think that's where it came from.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That's probably exactly where I thought it was.
So another thing I like about this film is I feel like he's taking jabs at not religion, but some religious people who are very pure about some things and then are willing to do very horrible things, which are actually way worse than the.
Yes.
So she's horribly offended when he puts swear words in there.
Yes.
It's like, oh, but they're street kids. That's what they talk. She's like, no, like take them out. But then, of course, she's holding him hostage and does brutal things to him. And it kind of reminds me of like some of those, like a George Bush or something who is like, a puritanical kind of religious right political leader, but then is willing to like drop bombs on Iraq and do like these terrible things. And who's the character in the Mike Flanagan one I really liked, my number one, with the Highland. There's that one character who's very puritanical, but she's also super evil.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember the character's name. I know exactly who you mean.
Yeah. So she reminded me of
yes.
her. I almost wonder if she was a bit of an inspiration for that character.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll look it up.
There's a point where, there's lots of things that I like. But there's a point where you can see her mental deterioration by her physical look.
Yes.
Remember when she goes out in the rain and she's got the gun. And
Midnight Mass.
Yeah.
Sorry.
She's got the gun and she goes, well, I better leave before I put bullets in this. I mean, so there's an obvious hint to, okay, that's going to come back later.
Yeah.
But there's also the Memory Lane book, which he sees a couple times. And then when he actually opens it, and it's just this like page after page of these horrors that she's
So that's
done.
the revelation that she's not just like an obsessed fan,
Totally.
like an unhealthy. She's like a serial
Psycho.
killer.
Yeah.
Like, she killed her father and her coach and the head of the nursing department. And like you read when you're flipping,
her husband too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or both husbands. Was she married more
she
than
murdered
once?
babies as a nurse, which reminded me of that story in the UK recently where there was that nurse who was convicted.
There's been several killer nurse over the years.
So she's not just this obsessed fan who happens to
she's really unstable.
Yeah.
Like,
Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah, she's off her rocker.
So that's kind of a cool revelation when he realizes like, oh, okay, I'm really dealing with something sinister here.
I don't know if you noticed it the first time, but it was so blatant to me this time because I was caught up in the story. I think the first time I watched it, but when he first gets out of his bedroom, and he knocks the penguin and catches it.
Yes.
But then when he puts it back, I'm like, you're not paying attention, buddy. That was not facing that direction. And of course, that's what catches him.
That's what she says, right? Oh, that ceramic penguin normally faces due south or something. Like, oh, wow. Because I was reading, because she seems like someone with bipolar disorder. And I guess a psychologist said, like, this is the best representation of someone with bipolar disorder that I've ever seen in any film. Like, they thought it was the most accurate. That kind of like, they love you and they're attached to you, but then if anything goes awry, then...
Yeah.
And do you get the sense that she's romantically interested in him?
Not in a conventional sense, no.
Because I thought it was interesting when they have dinner together.
Yes.
That she's put makeup on.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I wonder if they're trying to like hint that maybe I don't know how it is in the book because I've not read it, but I almost got the sense that in her perfect world, she would almost be married to him or in a relationship.
Okay,
with him.
now that's true because she says quite a few times, I love you. And she says to him, this is towards the end, I know you don't love me, so don't bother saying it.
Right. So you're thinking that, I guess romantic love.
Well, yeah. And I can't, like, it's hard to tell sometimes, is she talking about romantic love or is she talking about like I love you as the artist who creates this work that
Yeah. For the first half of the film, I thought it was more that I love you as an artist, but then at the dinner table, she got makeup on. It has like a romantic atmosphere. I'm like, oh, maybe she would actually ideally have a relationship with him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously she's been married. She has no children, but one would assume that her marriage has been consummated. Like and
she idolizes him because he finds out she has a whole shrine towards him in her house. And she made maybe it's at the dinner table. You'll never know the fear of losing someone like you when you're someone like me. Mm-hmm. So she kind of recognizes that he's like on another level. And that's where his power over her comes from, even though he's physically at her mercy. Yeah.
And there's, we can't do the spoilers without talking about the hobbling scene. That
for sure.
That still makes me cringe.
And that's what I think firmly makes this into a horror film. Like, I think after that scene,
yeah, so you made it to the spoiler section, and I'm going to really spoil this for you. But she finds out
that's hard to watch
that he's been out of his room, and as an act of love, because she doesn't want him to get out of his room, she puts a 4x4 between his ankles, between his two legs, and a sledgehammer. And I mean, I've seen this film quite a few times, so I knew it was coming. but I had to turn away. I couldn't watch.
They show it.
They show it.
Yep.
And the practical effects are really good.
They are really good.
The cringe is the only word I can think of. Like it just
made my stomach turn.
Oh
for sure.
And then to top it off, she does this to his ankles. She breaks both of his ankles. And I can only imagine, I don't even know if I can imagine the pain involved in that because he passes out from the pain. But her face softens and she goes, God, I love you. And it's like that one segment of the film, I think, encapsulates her insanity.
Yeah.
Better than anything else in the film.
100%. And the irony of like, you've just spent however many months like nursing this guy back to health who couldn't walk. And then as soon as he's able to walk again, and that speaks to she wants to maintain that control over him. But yeah, that's the most striking scene. And I guess apparently that was a bit controversial because in the book, she uses an axe.
Yes.
So she cuts his feet off, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess they debated I guess they felt that the studio they thought that would be too extreme to actually use an axe. So they switched it to a hammer.
Yeah.
Even though I think the hammer's almost maybe like more gross.
I was going to say, I don't know that isn't worse watching. I mean, because you see his joint go 90 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, hey, my feet don't move like that. Like that. And that's the cringe part is, what it's like when you like sprain an ankle or do whatever. And I do wonder that. Like, I think, I don't know if it would have fit in with the rest of the film to have the axe scene in there, like to have her actually cut his feet off as opposed to just hobble him.
I think sometimes the guidelines just so like there's no blood, like, okay, I guess we can do it.
Yeah. But arguably it's worse.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think my stomach would turn quite the same way if she just cut them off than the knocking and seeing them go sideways. And yeah, totally.
Well, and especially the lead up, because I envy people who haven't seen this and it's like, what's going on? Whereas when you've seen it, you go, oh man, this part.
Yeah.
And you just like, I'm gearing up for it because I know how visceral this scene is.
My wife was out doing something and she just came in to sit with me right with that scene. She's like, oh, are you serious? Like, oh, it's just Misery. It's not that bad. And
you couldn't have picked a worse scene to come in on.
Yeah, for sure.
And even, I think I said the thing that bothered me was the car, but there's one other thing that bothered me, and that was the death of the sheriff.
Yes.
Because he's such a neat guy.
I wrote down like the first thing he said, he's just instantly likable.
Yeah.
Like his first comment, like he just is lovable guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the banter between him and his wife, because she's pretty sarcastic and there's
there's hilarious dialogue with those two because the movie is quite tense.
It is.
But that's your bit of
that's your comic relief.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, there's that spice again.
Isn't she like, oh, I'd rather be under the bed sheets with you? Or she's like grabbing his leg. He's like, sorry, when you're in this truck with me, like you're my deputy and I'm the sheriff. And
yeah.
I had forgotten that part of it and I enjoyed those scenes a lot.
Yeah, they really make the film in terms of timing because, just by the list of films that Rob Reiner's done, when you think about, I've seen When Harry Met Sally, I don't know how many times, and Spinal Tap, the same thing, because his father was a comedian and because his early days were in sitcoms, I think Rob Reiner has a very on point sense of timing.
Totally.
In terms of how long to keep the tension going before you become bored of it and it loses its effect. How, in Harry Met Sally, those are comedies, When Harry Met Sally, but this one, there's those comedic elements. I don't even know if I call it comedic, but there's timing elements where you diffuse the tension.
I think the intent is to be funny, like make the audience laugh a bit and certainly release tension. And you're right, because for a film that sometimes I think the critique or the complaint about films were just two people in a room for a whole movie is for attention, but this movie never feels slow or boring or long or like it's engaging the entire time despite it just being mostly two characters interacting.
And I think I have a sense that that's what makes Reiner's adaptation of Stephen King films so good. Not just his timing, but if you look at all of his other films as well, it's about relationships and the interaction between characters. A Few Good Men, perfect example of that.
Yeah, Princess Bride.
Princess Bride. I mean, lots of comedy.
Inconceivable.
Yeah, inconceivable. I don't think that word means what you think it means. I just think he intuitively understands that Stephen King's work, his best work, is not about the thing in the closet.
Yeah.
It's about the scary things that we do to one another and the darkness in us as human beings, as opposed to, I think Stephen King's horror is not always, but is often a manifestation of something bad in people that gets manifested externally. I mean, if you look at Christine, for example, there's the old man that owns Christine, and he's more than a curmudgeon. I mean, he's kind of like a nasty, evil guy. And I think that Christine is a manifestation of the evil within.
100%.
And I think that's Stephen King at his best. That's what his stuff is about human.
That's probably why he's so popular. He speaks to so many people because everyone can recognize that in his work. Yeah, agreed. What's the other thing?
Was there anything that didn't work for you?
No.
In this film?
No. I think it's just pretty I think it's, as I said before, I do think it's in the same league as like The Shining or The Exorcist. I think it's like an all-time one of the best horror movies. Like, I think it's executed pretty perfectly. The performances are so good. And so much tension, like every time he's out of the room and you see that she's like on her way back, and that cutting between like him crawling along and trying to get back into the bed. Or when he's pouring the drugs into her wine glass and you know she's about to come back, and then she like it's the sense of tension in this is just so heightened. Yeah. And it's very engaging. And the depth of their characters and whatever, like the psychological profile of her is so rich and interesting. Like she wears a cross around her neck, and like the her kind of love for him, but then she's willing to do all these horrible things to him at the same time. It's just a very rich, great movie, all-time great movie, I think. Yeah, and again, in terms of timing, like the first time he gets out of his room, he just makes it back in and locks the door, and she doesn't catch him. But the second time, he realized, like, he's quite a ways further into the house, and he's got to really scramble to get back into his room, and he's like sweating and whatever. And I thought, okay, well, he's done for. And he's like, you didn't give me my pills. And so that like is super quick thinking, but it's like, yeah, that would cause that reaction. Yeah. Cause he's in pain and he's going to sweat and he's going to look, red or whatever. Totally. And I just think by inching it along that little extra bit, right? He really, Rob Reiner really does know when to end a scene, when to extend it, when to, diffuse the tension. Yeah, it's just so good. And it wouldn't be as good if the performances weren't so strong. Oh yeah. I mean, they both make it, I think. Yeah. But Kathy Bates makes the film. 100%. No question. Yeah. Bette Midler might not have been the same. I don't think we might not be talking about Misery right now. And yeah, like sometimes he drags you along with the tension when he's crawling along. Yes. But then there's also the scene where the sheriff finds him in the basement and then abruptly, like, bam, like you're just like, whoa, like out of nowhere. I know. And they kill him off. So he kind of can do both. And the surprise and the shock and the dramatic tension. That reminds me of, and I don't know if this was an inspiration or not, the scene, I don't know how well you know Psycho, but when one of the cops is poking around and he's at the top of the staircase and he gets stabbed, not shot, and he falls down the staircase. That's instantly what came to my mind. I mean, it's I wonder if that's a deliberate. I wonder too. Yeah. I mean, it's set up differently and he's shot, not stabbed, but, and I mean, Kathy Bates, Annie Wilkes doesn't have mommy issues like Norman Bates. Hey, that's just interesting. Kathy Bates. It is, Norman Bates. Just, it's such a good film. And it's funny because some of these films like Misery, like Lost Boys,
I haven't seen in a long time.
No, I'd not seen Misery in a long time.
And so I really appreciated you choosing this one because there's so many films that come out and I always feel like I'm behind the 8 ball. I haven't seen as much as I want. It's often a struggle to go back and say, okay, am I going to go back and rewatch something or am I going to watch something new? And for me, I don't know if you get into this, but there are times when I'll just go back and watch something because I know exactly what I'm going to get and it's what I'm in the mood for.
Yes, you know, when you watch something you haven't seen, you don't know if you're going to like it. When you watch an old comfort, you're like, you know it's going to be good.
I mean, it's just like the Reacher series.
Yeah,
that's popular. I wasn't as enamored with season 2 as I was with season 1, so I went back and rewatched season 1. Now I pretty much could have told you each episode. There's only 8 episodes. I knew what was going to happen, but I just like that character so much that it was like, yeah, I feel like I want some Reacher.
And so you felt like you wanted some Annie Wilkes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
I like too how sadistic she is psychologically in that, like, her coming in and burning his book that he had just written, like that alone would have been just absolutely devastating. Like you've just spent all this time.
And that's the author thing. Yeah.
Like there was a time in university where I wrote a 3,000 word essay and then it got deleted and just that like, oh my God, like I have to go back and do that all again. And you know, you won't be able to do things the same way, but she goes a step further and actually makes him do it.
Yes.
So it's bad enough or she were to burn his book, but like, no, you're going to burn your own. It's making like you shoot your own dog or kill your own family member or something like that.
And it's such
sadistic,
sweet revenge. The final scene, well, the penultimate scenes of the film where
it's a brutal fight scene too.
It is brutal.
With a woman, especially, like I was almost shocked that they would do that even in 1990. I'm like, okay, like she's being pretty brutalized. Like when he brings the typewriter down on her head.
Yeah. But I think that that's important because she does physically dominate him through the film.
Yes.
And she's, you know,
she's not petite.
No. James Caan is small stature, but he's that lithe, athletic. Like he's always looked like that, right? He's always been very thin, but like that lithe muscle.
Yeah.
But of course, he's incapacitated, so he doesn't have that. But I wondered when he was typing, and you get us because there are scenes where he's lifting. He's lifting up the typewriter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is he doing? Like, is he just trying to rehabilitate himself? And then of course it comes out in the end.
Yeah.
And then he burns the book.
Yes.
In front of her. Yes. And that's, such sweet revenge. And the look on her face, because he's like, yep, you'll never know what's going to happen.
And that's him enacting his like psychological revenge on her. Because that's the leverage he has over her.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Here's your perfect book. I wrote it in your honor and
poof. Yeah. So good.
That's what makes the movie so good. There's on all those different levels. And the foreshadowing of the lighter and the glass and the cigarette and how that plays at the end and at the beginning. Like, I think that's opening shot, isn't it?
Yes.
It's those 3 things.
Yep.
So I love like this time knowing like the significance and the importance of those objects.
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering, it's a close up.
Yes.
That pans and then comes out.
Yeah.
So you see him at the table putting his book away and all the rest of it. Yeah. Yeah.
So and it was cool in an interview with her. She said she'd actually read Misery and had like kind of fantasized about playing Annie Wilkes.
Interesting.
So then the fact when she actually got the role, she was like, that was almost like a dream come true for her, which makes sense because she was so dedicated to it.
I didn't realize that she had actually thought about that before.
Yeah, that was new to me as well. You asked me about Niggles. Did you have anything that you didn't like about it, or?
No. I mean, the couple of things, I mean, I didn't like the fact that she shot the sheriff, but that fits in the story. I mean, I was sad that he's such a neat character.
I actually shot the sheriff.
I didn't, but did you shoot the deputy is the question.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a really bad dad
I'm
joke.
sorry. Yeah.
But you laugh, so you encourage me. You'll get more of that.
Exactly.
No, I mean, you know, aside from for me, a little bit unbelievable, but as you pointed out, quite believable story of people driving on bad tires too fast in the snow. And of course, you've got to set it up. So let's suspend our disbelief. No, I mean, I think the pacing is so good. And the performances are so good. And like I said, those little bits of humor, like I'll Be Seeing You as the end credits roll.
Yes,
that old song.
That was good.
That was, like just, I really appreciate little things like that, because if you've been paying attention, you know that that's going to haunt him forever.
Yeah.
And he's going to be seeing Annie Wilkes. And it's like, yeah, you will be seeing her. I don't know. I just think those little things are those little thoughtful things are what put a movie over the edge for me.
Yeah. Like last episode, we talked about Mandy, and of course, this is not as rich and there's not as much going on as something like Mandy, but there are like, when you rewatch it, you can kind of look for those little things.
It's still thoughtful filmmaking. It's different because it's not so out there. It's very conventional in many ways. But conventional can still be very, very good if you've got a thoughtful director who has timing, who understands, and you've got great performances like you had here.
And the significance of like earlier on when she's shaving him with a razor.
Yes.
Just that power of like having a razor blade right next to his throat and he's at her mercy.
Totally.
That just shows you like how vulnerable he is and how much like physical power she has over him. Like I thought, I think this movie is close to flawless.
It's very, very good.
And a high recommend.
Yes.
Okay. I feel like we kind of tackled it all.
I think so. Do you a 7.8 on IMDb? I don't know if I've seen anything higher than that.
That's a tragedy, I think. 7.8? That seems low.
Well, for this kind of film though, it's pretty high.
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah, considering the performances.
And it won an Oscar. Like,
yeah. But I'm not sure. Like I was trying to remember. Have I seen anything like in
That's fair. Yeah, for the horror genre.
For the horror genre,
that is very high.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think Silence of the Lambs might have been up there close.
Hereditary, maybe.
Maybe I don't think it was that high.
No, maybe not.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. You don't care because you're probably not looking it up on IMDb. So there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, are we done with this one?
I think so. So yeah.
So what question would you like to leave our listener/viewer with?
Yeah, I think there's so many Stephen King works and films. I'd be curious to know, what is your favorite Stephen King
adaptation?
Adaptation,
okay.
Yeah, that you've watched. Next episode, we're going to try and review Late Night with the Devil. So this is a new 2024 release. So as long as we can see it in theaters in our town, I think that'll be our next episode for May 1st.
And so that's not going to be a bonus. That'll just be a regular episode.
That'll be a regular episode.
Okay.
But we haven't given you any bonus episodes this season, so we'll make sure.
And we'll try. I mean, it may or may not come to this theater. I don't know how wide a release it's got. So we're not in a big community. So we may or may not see it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, thanks for watching and listening.
Yeah, indeed. And we'll see you in the aisles.